Right. So in Google, if you type the word ethnography, the number of hits that you would get, and some of these are, so some of the ethnographies are life stories, some of them are analysis of letters, policies, regulations, organizations. There are autobiographical ethnographies. There's something called action research ethnography. There's institutional ethnography. There's something called narrative analysis ethnographies. And there's even performance, where dancers and singers are actually doing tableaus, and they also there is a process and a method that they follow in terms of, they have their ethnographies. So these are just some examples, and the dots there are that actually there are many more than I can list. So for me, I think, as someone who wants to talk around rigor, so I really feel like him. So what do I do? How do I talk about rigor? Ethnography is not actually a method to generate data, right? It is an approach, and an approach to study the social, whatever we want to call as the social. Ethnographies do not always deal with socially bounded groups. So that is the romantic notion. That is in a way, a purist ethnographer would say. You go away in, the Lone Ranger, this ethnographer like Malinowski or Boas, someone who went away into this far-off land, and then they went there, spent time, came out, and there, behold, we knew all about those cultures. It's no longer that way. It has become more and more and more complicated, because societies are not static. We have been moving in a very complex way, and so that is, so what do you do as an ethnographer then? You may have to chase information. You may have to chase knowledge through networks, through groups, through institutions, sometimes maybe just an individual. But the idea is that what we understand as ethnography today and what it started out as have actually become quite simply completely different beings in a way. Now, as most of you would know, a lot of social scientists like words. So these reams of writing and interesting writing that's available. You can just type keywords on Google, you'll get a lot of free PDFs to read as well. And I think three of us will also try and sort of give you a range of reading that you can use. So what are we saying? When we are doing ethnographies, what do? We are actually walking literally through these very complex circuits that exist, which is the social. Isn't it? So let me give you an example. When I was growing up as a young girl, one of the cardinal rules of behavior that we were taught as girls was, can anyone tell me? Or maybe I'm the oldest, so, was how do you sit when guests come into your home? So either your mother told you, your brother told you, your father told you, your grandmother told you, somebody told you. What was the appropriate way? You sit cross-legged, how do you fold your dress, and so on. Why is that? Why is the act of crossing your legs in front when guests come and appear in a particular way for a woman was important? So what does it say? So that is a behavior. It's an expected behavior, but the expected behavior is linked to families. It's linked to relationships in families. Then it's linked to the society. It's linked to institutions. It's linked through networks. So there's somebody out there who said that girls should be like this. So that information flew, it sort of went, and it got, it sort of sedimented in the system somewhere, and then that's the kind of behavior that we have. So, but what is the ultimate, it started from a, so by just saying crossing one's leg can tell you nothing. But if you trace that through this complex circuit, where will it take you normally? A lot of feminists have taken it to what they call as the patriarchal ideology, which Nakhiran also spoke about. So one of the strengths of ethnographies is that it lets the researcher take that journey through these complex circuits and try and build, maybe not linear explanations, but how you build that explanations to get a sense of what that means. So these are very general kind of explanations. Now we all talk about the field, isn't it? We all talked about the field. Some people here said, I go to the field, I went there, or I did this. So already as researchers we are talking about the field as the other, in a way, isn't it? We are talking about the field as the other. So is it field means, does it always mean geographical? Do you think it's always set around, is it rural, is it urban, is it this, is it that? No, your field can even be a policy. It is a policy you're studying, that is your field. So the approach, what approach suits that? Field can also mean institutions, it can mean networks, it can mean villages, it can mean health centers, it can mean many things. But what is it we define as the field? And I think that tends to be a very crucial element in the ethnographic approach, that at least I think as ethnographers we are very conscious of that, because in many ways that actually decides ultimately what your method is going to be. Your approach is ethnographic, but what your method is going to be. Ethnographers don't do just interviews or don't do just participant observation, they do many other things as well. So in a way, from what I understood, from what Nakhiran basically told us, was that the ethnographic approach, essentially what it does is it seeks to get under the skin of representations and reifications of organizational or social reality. Okay, that's what we try to do. We also try to understand what is the day-to-day or the quotidian, the day-to-day human processes by which, like he said, reality is constructed, experienced, or vice versa. It may be experienced and then you experience something and then you construct a particular reality around it. So when we say health system, can we actually draw it? Was it all? You all drew that Martian, you went through the Martian exercise. But after so many days of listening and talking to each other, do you think that actually represents what a health system is? It may represent, it is a representation of the health system. It is not the. So there is no the representation of health systems in a way. Okay? So that is one of the things. So what are systems? So systems actually, ethnographers believe that as a whole, they only exist in our imagination. Because you can't hold them, you can't feel them. They are not objects. It's a strange space, it's a strange organism which is made up of materials, people, and their thoughts and their behavior and all those things. So in that sense, systems they normally exist in our imaginations. But it is this connected or disconnected and fragmented nature of the systems, and how you pull them together, how you assemble them together, how you may prize them apart, what you do within there, that is what we are trying to understand when we talk about health systems, isn't it? So as you can see, we are already getting to a stage where it is becoming increasingly difficult to get any sense of certainty. And that is very scary. It's a bit, we feel, I think sometimes it's a bit dangerous because it's very easy to get lost when you do this. Okay? But It's also something I think that you need to keep in mind. It's important to have that understanding. You may have an immediate understanding of what a health system is, but there's an alterity, there is something else which also you should think and keep in your minds. Now, so then the way I went through that particular slide and spoke about, you must have thought, then what can ethnographers do in health systems basically? So what I've done is, I mean, this is not around health systems, but there's a policy ethnographer called Dwara Yanov, who's very well. So this is how she and her colleagues use ethnography. So what are they doing? They are saying that it is useful in a wide range of settings for research questions that seek to explore the meanings of particular political practices, concepts, or processes. This is because she's a political scientist. So she's using those terms. 2, situational actors, often in order to illuminate a wider ranging or more theoretical issue. But what are they actually doing? They are studying how organizational administrators implement policies, how policymakers and legislators actually think about the decisions they make and how they go about them. So someone can very easily say, why don't we do a policy analysis? Why do we have to do an ethnography? Fair enough, if you want to do a policy analysis, you can do. But the idea is to learn that you can also do an ethnography in that. And then something else in terms of how workers shape their work practices and relationships. So I'm actually going to take you through a slightly dense slide. We've been talking about methodology, method. There are a lot of things which has come up. So I thought before I just even start talking about rigor, just visiting what is methodology. So for me, basically, what I think of methodology is a global style of thinking. That means there is a broad understanding. There's a certain style of thinking. And it is a certain approach, a general approach to studying research topics, or it can be seen as an overall research strategy. So normally what happens is the last one, where we say a systematic sequence of procedural steps to be followed. 1, so the research design, question sampling, grids for data collection, organization. Normally when we say methodology, we mean that. But that's not what it is. That is only one part of what is a methodology. So in fact, the first thing is, what is your main cognitive mode? So for example, do you listen, do you watch, do you observe, do you read, do you question, do you converse? But we also have a theory of scientific knowledge at the back of our minds before we think, or at least a set of pre-assumptions about the nature of reality as we understand. Because do you just simply go into a field, do you just go into a village and then decide that, okay, this is what I want to study? No, we always go in with something, no? That there's a broad exploratory thing that you want to do, right? Now, and then we also have this thing about what is the purpose of our research? What are we going to do? Are we just going to describe? Are we going to explain? Are we going to intervene? Or are we even going to emancipate? We also, it's around reflexivity. We keep hearing this word, no, reflexivity, and the role of the researcher. And this is not in any way just navel gazing. It is not like say, oh, but I am a woman, I am this is my background. That is not reflexivity. It is admitting in a concrete way that your class, your caste, your gender, your nationality, your positions in groups, your sexuality, there are many things that make you ultimately ask a research question or think about what you want to explore. It is how you frame and put that. Now, reflexivity in ethnography is a very crucial and important element, but it comes from a very divisive, highly debatable, angst-ridden debates in the feminist world, where you ask the questions about voyeurism. Who are we researching? Why are we researching? So, for example, personally I know that I am not capable as a researcher to actually do a violence study or domestic violence study. Ethically, I should not do it if I feel I cannot do it. I may have my reasons. Not everyone can do and not everyone should do. Why? Because what is domestic violence? So somebody was asking, no, what are the consequences? But it's also about the researcher admitting that there are certain things that you feel you can do. So that reflexivity is also about that. So you see, it is not just, oh, I'm a woman, I am a man, and I'm a transgender, or I am this, or I am that. It is this combination, and how that has influenced maybe in some ways how you have. So that is one of the things. Now, then there's something called concepts of action. So there are three aspects to it actually. There's something called collectivism, there's something called individualism, and situationalism. So, and in this part actually many of these pertain to different kinds of theories. So the collectivism or holism, for example, deals with the Marxian or structural functionalism of Parsons and all those people. Then you have the individualism, which is about Max Weber, Raymond Boudon, and all of them. And they talk, I don't want to go too much because it's not necessary at this point. But if people are interested, then over Moodle we can have those readings and discussions if you want. But it's important to know that these things are there. And then you have situationalism, which is basically broadly coming under ethno-methodology. Then you have a range of solution devices or strategies you use to tackle your research problem. And then you have a systematic sequence of procedural steps, which all of us have. So which will be like your research plan, your study design, and what is your question, what are your samples or no samples, how do you organize your data collection, and all those, we normally go through what we do in the research plan. So now I actually get to what is rigor. So somebody was right, they said it's about being extremely thorough and careful. But it also means it's a way by which, as an individual researcher or group of researchers, we demonstrate integrity and competence. Maybe let's talk about rigor in a more sort of conversational, So what it actually means is that in ethnographic work, rigor is tied it's sort of very intricately tied to it being open-ended, to being in-depth and flexible, and to capture multiple dimensions of how things work or don't work in real time, and you privilege perspectives and experiences of the people you are studying. So this is like one of the, it's one of those sort of cardinal rules. Now I'm sure all of you have heard about triangulation, haven't you? I mean, this is like one of the things we do. We triangulate and we do. But actually, in the field of ethnography and more generally in qualitative research, triangulation rests in a very contested space. There are qualitative researchers who say that they will not triangulate. Why? Because you cannot apply the existing understanding of what is triangulation to what they do. We may agree or disagree. But you should also see it slightly in terms, these opinions that also come in terms of how many of the social science disciplines, when dealing in the area of medicine or health, have always had to do what? They are always having to catch up in a way. So in a defensive position. a lot of the debates tend to be defensive. So, okay, how do we triangulate? How do we validate? How do we do this? How do we do that? And the reason I am saying is very consciously I have not put all those terms. It is not that they are not useful, that they are not used, but the definition, the interpretation of what is validity in ethnography is very different from an RCT. Okay? So, that is something that you need to do. But it is not like they have come and said this is the gold standard, because in some ways that is ethically against what we do as ethnography. How can you say that there is a gold standard to phrasing a question around childbirth experiences? Is there a gold standard? Can we say that? Can you? Is there only one way to do it? So, can you then just have one standard against which you match what you do? You can't, isn't it? So, but generally I think the ethnographers, they do use triangulation, some people do. And in fact, there was a very interesting case 10 years back where in Australia, there were a group of qualitative researchers who were so frustrated that their case studies were not being published. They started something called meta case studies. So, what they were planning to do is increase the number of case studies across the nation to achieve a certain mass to make a difference. Another thing to remember in terms of ethnographic rigor is that the analysis is always interpretive, and it seeks to situate meanings of health policy and system practices in social, political and historical context. So, it is simply not about how the doctor behaves with the nurse in a unit. Starting from there, you will take it back right up to the wherever, but you do not just limit it to that. So, that is what I meant in the beginning when I said it is those threads, it is the liminal, what is under the surface that you are trying to bring and then sort of make sense. And then again we get to this thing around representation. So, your own position as researchers and participant observers actually helps shape the area of interest, questions you pose and the interpretive lens that we use. So, broadly we have. For broadly in terms of what I could understand after reams of reading is that in a way, how do you research ethically in ethnography? So, it is also about the relevance of what you are seeking to study. But there are issues of power and consent. But what we need to understand, and I think somebody said the other day, was that I may be powerful today but may not be powerful tomorrow in the field. It is not just that. The ethics is also about listening. It is about listening to people, and I mean actually listening to people you talk to and re-listen. And this thing around the ethical thing around representations, one of the things is around, it is not so much the credibility check, but actually depending on the size or the number of people you have talked to, you do go back. As PhD students, I have gone back to all my respondents and asked them before I went away to write, can I use your interview, can I use your photographs, can I? And my personal experience was women who were so happy being photographed before I left the field said, please don't use it. So, the thing about iteration is not just about the questions, iteration is also about your behavior, how you keep going back in the field. And so that centers around that the other person has the right to refusal even at the nth minute, if you can. Okay? So, and that is something within our control which you can do. Many times when we go away and write, it is not possible. So, the next is around issues of anonymity and processes of anonymizing. Do we anonymize, do we not anonymize? Collaborative ethnographies you don't, some ethnographies you have to. What if in your whole group X number of people say it's okay to use my name, and then Y number of people say don't use my name. How will that affect how you write? So, anonymity is a very dense word. It needs to be unpacked, and there are no single truths and no single answers. Different researchers come at it from very different perspectives of what anonymity means. You know? So, this is something we all, especially when we deal with here you are going to be talking to bureaucrats, you are talking to doctors, you are talking to patients in your primary health centers, you are doing. So, at every level, what is that? What is anonymity? And actually, this is again an area in qualitative research where there are very serious debates that are still ongoing. People are still arguing, trying to figure out how do we do, not do. And then this notion of reflexivity, I come back again to it, because nowadays, because of time, the time factor, there was a time where if you're doing a PhD, you can still spend 5 years, 7 years in the field, what you think is the field. But when we are working, we have 2-year projects, 3-year projects at the most, isn't it? But we all, so we have so you have the boss who is the main person, then you have co-investigators, then you have research associates, you have senior research associates, you have research assistants, then you have helpers in the field. Yeah, so the latest debate actually in ethnography is around the role of research assistants. So if research assistants are there, you know, if it's individual, you know the language and you are talking and so on. So there are limitations as well. So one of the key ethical things as an ethnographer is, again I go back to it, is taking that decision whether I am the right person or we are the right team to do this. It's not just about doing anything and everything. So then it goes back to our questions. So I may decide I still want to do it, but I may not do it as an ethnography. I might do it as a policy analysis, or maybe implementation research, or maybe something which will have its own set of ethics, its own principles of rigor. But there is a lot of writing around these issues, and for me the idea of this session was just sort of to let you know that it's not just questions that are posed to the ethnographic approach or the ethnographers. There are questions that are posed within us as well. We are also asking questions. There's a lot of angst that is involved when we go through these questions. So, and that is rigor, the ability to question oneself. So that thing about which said, what did it say? It said it was to be thorough and systematic. So being thorough and systematic means that a lot of these things, at least you try. I'm not saying tick, but practice, you know, those things. So for now, I'm going to stop here. I'm sure we can have many more conversations around this.